I was so chuffed recently to hear about a fabulous installation inspired by Breathing Room, created by participants at APA Andalucia and facilitated by the wonderful Cristina Savage. The artists there had a few questions for me. So hi Roberto, Daniela and Cristina. I absolutely loved your cyanotype cone installation, fabulous. And I'm so honoured that you chose my work as inspiration. So thank you so much for taking the time to make a video for me with your questions, and I'm going to try my very best to answer them.
Hi, my name is Roberto. I love the art, specifically photography and drawings. I love the portraits, photographies, and I love do different types of drawings. For example, portraits, animals, and portraits from music, from movies animations. I ask some questions for you. Which was the reason why the cones caught your attention?
Why did cones get my attention? Good question. It's quite hard to answer this without it getting really complicated and sounding kind of super pretentious, so sorry in advance for that. Sometimes I don't even understand myself, like why I'm instinctively drawn to something, and it takes a while for it to kind of bubble up and become obvious to my conscious mind. I think with cones it started as something to do with bringing together ideas about dimensionality, and I got very obsessed with making things three-dimensional from sheets of paper, which are basically two-dimensional, and that idea of creating an extra dimension from nothing became really fascinating to me. And I think that's because there's a connection to my mind, a kind of parallel to the idea in science that we're sort of surrounded by dimensions in space that we can apprehend, with having a sort of cognition that's operating differently or almost being in a different dimension to others. I think I always come back to cones because they're such a difficult geometry. Like whatever I make with them, it's a battle to make them do what I want. It's like they have their own input, and the kind of physics and geometry of the material world becomes this kind of reluctant collaborator that pushes back. So this kind of repetitive making that I get trapped in, it's like a praxis, a physicality of exploring all of that. And of course, as much as that's an abstract concern about the universe, it's also a very personal concern and a very human attempt at understanding my own cognition, my difference, my place in the world, and my feeling sometimes of being quite existentially alone in my own little dimension, I guess.
In which year were you introduced into the art adventure?
In which year was I introduced to the art adventure? Great question. Well, I always made art. When I was a little kid, my mum would park me in front of paper with glue and dried pasta shapes, and I was happy as anything. All I wanted to do was arts and crafts. Dyspraxia meant I was crap at drawing, and so by the time I was a teenager, I focused on photography. Fast forward to adulthood and me being extremely frustrated because despite being intelligent and capable, disability was thwarting most avenues, and I started making things. I eventually professionalised through funding from disability arts organisations, so I suppose I've been calling myself an artist since before 2010, but being funded and professionalised a lot less long, and I'm still kind of in the bracket of what the art world condescendingly terms an outsider artist, in that I don't have an art degree, I'm disabled, and I'm largely funded by disability arts. So I do still really struggle to get gallerists and curators to see or acknowledge my work. So even though I've been making art forever, I've still got a long way to go, I think.
How did you get ahead to build a course during the pandemic?
So how did we get help to build cones during the pandemic? This was actually a really nice thing we were able to do. Initially we'd conceived of sort of working parties with people sitting around a table chatting whilst they beavered away making cones, and obviously we couldn't do that during the pandemic. So it turned into a kind of cottage industry with us paying people piecework to make cones at home, which at that time when people couldn't get out and they couldn't work, it was a really nice way to be able to support people and get the cones we needed.
In continuation, I will ask you some questions from Daniela. What does your artwork represent?
So what does my artwork represent? Great question. So I don't think anything in my artwork is very directly representational. I think it's probably more nuanced than that, and I'm usually trying to sort of tease out a concept, but in quite an experiential or primal way. So I'm interested in conceptual things, but my processes and materials are always very much about primal instinct and gut feel, and I'm trying to sort of marry those in a way that works. I don't need for people to necessarily grasp at the concept that I'm trying to explore, but I do want to elicit in them some sort of emotion or visceral sense of the concept, but something deeper than the kind of forebrain nonsense of the concept itself. Maybe it's about trying to make very abstract, quite intellectual things immediate and bodily and emotional. I think I'm trying to make people feel their thoughts, because that's how I experience my own thoughts and intellect. It's very dense and abstract, but also really physically rooted and intuitive and emotional. And I don't understand rationality and emotion to be at opposing ends of an axis. I want to try to bring them together. And there's definitely a sort of a deep yearning, I guess, for me in trying to communicate on a deep and authentic level.
How did you come up with your movement concept?
How did we come up with the movement concept? Gosh, we are going back to 2014 now. So I wanted the groups of cones in the original version to move in and out, to be animate and living. So I invited a whole load of different friends with engineering skills to tea and cake in my living room for a kind of brainstorming session. And in the end, my brilliant collaborator Clive suggested that windscreen wiper motors would have the right motion. So a bunch of us went to a breaker's yard with socket sets and we clambered up piles of cars. There were no ladders, so it was like being Spider-Man, and extracted a bunch of different windscreen wiper motors. And in the very first version of Breathing Room, there was literally one motor for each pair of frames, and I've still got them in my loft. I think Puss says hello. Hello, Puss Puss. Hi. Hi, Papa.
Do you dedicate yourself to singing?
Okay, so the very last question, do I like singing? Would I like to dedicate myself to singing? What a wonderful question. Yes, I love music. In another life, I'd have been a professional musician. It's a slightly sad story. For me, my muscle tone issues meant I could never really get good at an instrument, no matter how much I practiced, and boy, did I practice. And similarly, I get a lot of vocal issues because of those muscle tone issues, and I'm not reliable enough to have been a professional singer. But I do still sing, and I keep meaning to make some recordings because nothing brings me more joy and closer to pure transcendence than music. I'm not a religious person, but I think it's the closest you can be to God, so to speak. And like with my work, I guess it puts you in this very sensory, primal, emotional, open, vulnerable, and very authentic place. And I think if you're one of those people who's kind of over calibrated and hypersensitive, that it's like you just don't have skin, then you can kind of use that as a gift, because you can channel your soul through your voice and through music and uplift and conjoin every consciousness in the room, and that's just an incredibly sacred thing.
Thank you. Se puede decir thank you también.
Thank you, claro que sí.
Thank you for your attention.
Muy bien, Roberto.
Good
Thank
luck.
you for making the video, Roberto.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for your excellent translation, Roberto. These questions were so interesting and they really made me think hard about how to explain my work to people. Bye.